You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, our guest is Sam Beibers, an artist here in the state of Mississippi. For the last 40 years, you've seen his work in the Mississippi Outdoors magazine and at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today we're talking with someone who you might not have ever seen him, but you've seen his work somewhere along the way. He is Sam Beibers, an exhibit specialist at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science, with us here on the show. Sam, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here, Matt.
And I think that's probably an apropos introduction because many of us have seen your work over the years.
Yeah. I like it like that. Y'all look at the work, but not me.
So we're talking exhibits that have artwork that is yours, drawings, renderings, paintings, and elsewhere, both at the museum, in the Mississippi Outdoors magazine. So if we can, let's go back to how this all kind of started for you. And I know that's a big, broad question.
Well, it kind of is.
How would you answer that?
Well, when I got out of college, I came down here to Jackson. I went to Delta State. Okay. And then in the mid to late 80s, I started working for the Department of Wildlife. And I was the art editor of Mississippi Outdoors. Okay. And David Watts was the editor back then. And I only worked there a couple of years before I decided I would throw out my own shingle and start my own business. So I started freelancing. And one of my freelance clients was, in fact, the Department of Wildlife. They just kept using me. So I did a lot of work. I did one of the old logos for the Department of Wildlife, the car tags, the illustrated car tags, and the wildlife habitat books, and some other things along here and there along the way. And finally, about 10 years ago, I was doing a lot for the museum in a freelance capacity, and lo and behold, a job came up, and I thought, I wouldn't mind going back there. I always loved doing stuff for the museum as well as the main office, and I got the job and got to start. I had not had experience in three-dimensional design, so that was new to me, but I studied up on it as quick as I could, and I really grew to love that too. Yeah. So just started designing on the computer, and it's not all an illustrated thing. Some of it's just working with copy and photographs. So a lot of variety. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So at your college days, Delta State, did you study art in college, and that's where that came from?
Well, initially in junior college, I started out at Northwest Junior College, which was in Senatobia. And I was a wildlife biology major. Okay. But the chemistry and some of the higher maths kind of showed me I was in the wrong area. And I quickly changed over to art. Okay. So I got a painting degree and a graphic design degree, and later a master's degree at Mississippi College in art. And so now, lo and behold, I'm working in wildlife, which I started out in, and art. Yeah. So, it's perfect.
Sort of the definition of full circle, really kind of coming back to both beginnings there.
Truly, yeah.
So even before that, was art something that came natural to you as a young person, as a child, as a kid, or something you picked up along the way?
I guess so. Well, when I was a little boy, my mother used to draw horses a lot, and I would sit at the kitchen table beside her, and I would try to draw horses too. Of course, mine were crude and not nearly as good as hers. But when I got into first grade, we would have little drawing projects, and I was the only kid that could draw and make mine look like something. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was I remember going home one day and asking Mama, what's wrong with all these children They don't know how to draw. I didn't know it was a talent.
It's just something you did.
I just thought it was something everybody did.
Yeah.
So I guess I learned pretty early that it was, whether it's a talent or not, it was something I enjoyed and was fairly good at. Mm-hmm. So I just kept it going. I just never stopped.
So at the kitchen table with your mom was sort of the genesis, the inspiration.
Yeah. So it goes way back.
Yeah.
I'm 66 and a half now. So that was back in I was a little kid in the early 60s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about that?
Yeah.
So, and then we fast forward, you mentioned sort of the career that, the college career geared towards art.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find what was that first career step post-college that began that path for you where you found your way here?
Oh, well, I worked at educational television immediately out of school with an internship, and I did a lot of illustration. And wherever I could find the opportunity, I would do art that had animals in it, just because I always loved animals. It might be a wood duck or a raccoon or a deer or turkey, whatever. But I would find ways to get that into my assignments. And I did other stuff too that wasn't wildlife oriented. But I moved to Jackson in the early 80s, and ETV was a really good spot to start growing because my art director was a fellow named Glenn Warren, who is a fantastic watercolor artist. And he would come in and paint and draw every morning, and he would do his own stuff until 8 o'clock, then he'd close it up, and he would do work stuff. So I started doing kind of the same thing. So that way I was able to build up a pretty good bit of paintings, watercolors of stuff that I like to do, whether it was for work or not. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned sort of an affinity for animals.
Mm-hmm.
You just use the phrase things that you like to do. When I see someone like you, that it's obviously some God-given talent, but taking it further in a career, I think about that phrase or that axiom that success follows passion. You really, to drive it as far as you've been able to drive it in a lifelong career, you really have to be passionate about what you're doing, don't you?
Yes, you do. And even when you're not necessarily in the mood, just the practice, the day in and day out practice always gets you through it. And most of the time I am passionate about it. And but sometimes I still fail. But it's just paper. You just wad it up and throw it away and start again. Yeah. So it's just no big deal. I just keep going until I get what I want.
It looks like you want it to.
Yeah.
When did you make your debut? And you mentioned a minute ago, but go back to your debut at Mississippi Outdoors and in the magazine. When did that start?
I think it was in the fall of 86.
Okay.
I think 86 or 87.
Was that painting, watercolor, pencil drawing? Like initially, what were those works of art?
Well, initially, I was laying out the magazine like your graphic artists do here now. But there would always be a story or two that would need an illustration. And one of the first things I did was a pencil drawing of a buck deer for the DMAP program. Okay. And then soon after that, I began doing, I had to do a dove painting for the back of the magazine one time, and some Bob White and turkey, and illustrated a turkey story. So just about every issue I had usually 2 or 3 things, either drawings or watercolors of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I had an experience as a senior in college of having a photo of mine that was published with an article I wrote in a Bassmaster magazine. Mm-hmm. I didn't draw it, I didn't paint, I took the photo and wrote the story, but seeing it in the printed magazine, I almost don't even remember what I was paid for it, but seeing it printed in the magazine was a really interesting, I don't even really know what the word was, experience.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
A really good feeling.
Yeah.
I would imagine that maybe even more so than a photo, something that you've painstakingly spent that amount of time to put together from your own fingertips, to see it in that print for the first time, it would almost make the hair on the back of your neck stand up just a little bit. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. And whether anybody else sees it that way or not, I do. And I see it and I say, glad I did that. But then I'm always ready to go on to the next thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a reward just in doing it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether you get paid or not. Of course, it's good to be paid.
Right. That is one thing I found out about freelance writing for magazines. It's hard to get paid enough for some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But you've managed to turn your artwork into, as I mentioned, a career. You touched on it earlier, what you do with the museum now. Mm-hmm. And you said 3D. So that's actual physical displays that are works of art, right? Tell me more about that.
I usually design on the computer, and people either in the research area or education, or sometimes me, we write what the story's going to be. We recently did one about murmuration of birds, which is a flocking pattern they get in sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we built a whole exhibit around that. So actually on that one, I wrote the copy with help from Nick Winstead, our ornithologist. And so we work on that, edit it, go back and forth for weeks and months, get the look on the computer. We start bringing in photographs and or illustrations, and then we take it to somebody that actually builds it out. Then they come in and they take our video footage, if we have some, which we did for that, and just assemble everything. And it's just like we designed it. There's nothing that surprises you. It's just real controlled, and you really get what you want.
Standing back, looking at a finished product, like a builder stands back and sees the home, he's finished it. Mm-hmm. You get that same feeling when you look at that?
Yeah, that's really special because you worked on it so long. I mean, some of these projects go on over a year. Mm-hmm. We're working on one right now that's going to end up taking over 2 years.
Really?
Yeah, and I'll be retired. Hopefully they'll still let me be an advisor on it. But when these things come out in the public, fully built, and you know that you had a lot to do with driving that thing from the beginning to the end, working with all these other people, that's a really good feeling. That's when you're working with a team, and I really love that.
And then maybe I guess the next level would be when it's your artwork, whether it's a painting, a drawing, a design, or like that display, and you see a tour group stop and view, or you see kids stop and gaze. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like that next level of satisfaction for the work, isn't it?
We did one thing with a wingspan of a bird, and different birds are marked, and a child or a parent can stand in front of that thing and say, what bird does your wingspan match? It might be a wild turkey or a swan or a pelican. And it's fun to see them do that. Yeah. So that's a real public community kind of reward. But the reward in doing solitary stuff like painting and drawing, it's all just self-fulfillment. You're out in the woods all by yourself. Yeah. And, oh, my gosh, I work there at the museum, and there's these woods right outside the door. And I go out there frequently and sketch and think and just look around.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, as far as getting inspiration, do you ever work off photographs, or is it just kind of observing real life and going from there?
It's a combination. For if I'm doing animals, I frequently have to work from photographs. Uh-huh. For example, you couldn't get a bear to be still.
Right.
Or a bird, particularly a bird. So I work from photographs, or I work from study skins. A study skin, if you don't know, it's just a bird that had been harvested and is kept in our bird collection at the museum. And you look at them, and you can look at the wings to make sure you get the wing detail correct and the tail detail, etc. But there are also jars of specimens, wet jars with toads and frogs and salamanders, crayfish, fish. And sometimes I'm able to use those. Put them on my desk with a little magnifier, And anything that I can't understand necessarily from a photograph I see, I have a real specimen there that I can make sure that I've got that detail done correctly.
Do you have, at your home or at your workspace, you have drawings, paintings kind of stacked away that no one's ever seen?
I'm afraid so. Yeah. I've got sketchbooks. I probably have 24 just stacked up on a bookshelf.
And I noticed you came in with several here. Those are sketchbooks.
Those are sketchbooks. And paintings, I have dozens, hundreds of paintings. Some will never be seen by other eyes than my own or my grandkids, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But sometimes people see them.
Painting, oil painting, watercolor, do you have one you prefer, a favorite?
Yeah, I prefer watercolor, and there's a form of watercolor called gouache.
Okay.
Where it's a heavy-bodied watercolor where you can actually paint light on top of dark, which basically goes against the rules of watercolor.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to oil painting in that respect, that you can work light on top of dark. Generally, a watercolor, you're building up from light to dark, but you can go back and forth with gouache.
Yeah. Over the years, as people began to, see your work, know that it was yours, do you ever have people that approached you and had they want you to do something for them, or just like a personal project for people once they found out who you were and what your work was?
Yeah, I've done a lot of that commission type work.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do people's pets, dogs, cats. Sometimes people want a hunting scene or a scene of their cabin. I've even done weddings for people. I mean, they found out that I can paint people, so I might get commissioned to do somebody's wedding. I'll take snapshots at this wedding and do pictures of the bride and groom, which is something I never thought I would like. I mean, okay, I'll try it. Ended up liking it.
Yeah.
So I just do all kinds of stuff.
What's more difficult, people or animals?
People, without a doubt. Because we're so used to looking at one another, I think we know, it's particularly if it's someone we know, if we don't get something exactly right. An animal, I mean, a biologist can tell. Most people cannot. A tree, it's really easy because there's not a whole lot of plant people, a few botanists around. But a lot of landscape type stuff is very forgiving. And animals are a little less forgiving, but people are the hardest thing to do.
How about that?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam, why did you decide to, I guess, for watercolor to be your main medium? And on that note, I feel like there are a lot of well-known Mississippi artists that do use watercolor as their medium. Is there like any kind of cultural significance to that to you, or do you have other famous artists from Mississippi that do use watercolor?
Well, first of all, it was a practical decision for me to use watercolor because even though I had worked in oils and acrylic, pastels, even did pottery for a while, which I loved, but I came to watercolors because I had little children, and watercolors were easy to have your colors on a palette, and when you're done, you close the palette. And when you go back to paint again, whether it's the next day or a week later, all you got to do is get your brush wet and those colors come back to life. Oil paints dry out, and you have to squirt them out of the paint tubes every single time you paint. So it's a practical issue to go to watercolors for me. Also, I do have some friends that are watercolor painters and some that are oil painters. Every weekend, there are 3 of us that get together every weekend for morning coffee, and we talk about our artwork with one another. Wyatt Waters, who's a watercolorist, and Ron Lindsay, who's an oil and acrylics painter. So we show each other our work, critique one another's work, and we've been doing that now for 10 or 15 years.
You relayed a story once about, and this goes back to sort of the inspiration of how your love for wildlife and interest intersects with art, and in your young life, a story about building a box because you wanted to have a baby raccoon to raise.
Yeah.
Take me back to that story.
Okay. Well, first of all, I know that that's frowned upon because a baby raccoon is usually there for a reason. His mother just hasn't come to bring him where he needs to be yet.
But a child didn't know that, right?
Yeah. And this was in 1967 or 68. I was 11 or probably 10 or 11 years old. And I read books about raccoons all the time. I loved them, and I loved going hunting with my dad, and we'd go rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting. And, but the raccoon was the one that just stuck with me for some reason. So I asked Dad if he'd help me build a box trap. Well, he mainly did it. I was just helping him. And we built this little wooden box trap out of some boards with a little twig in it with some bait down at the end of that twig. And if the raccoon would bump that twig, the door would close. And I would bait that thing faithfully, put fresh bait on it every time. And I tried different things. It might be a little bit of crawfish or a little minnow. It could be cheese, could be peanut butter, anything. And one day I went out there to check on it, and by golly, that trap door was shut. And I was excited. And I picked it up, and it was heavy, so I knew something was in there. I thought, well, this is a lot bigger than a baby raccoon, though. So I got it to the house, and my dad got home from work, and I said, Dad, we got something. We need to open it up. And we had a couple of rabbit hutches because we raised rabbits. We liked to eat rabbits. When we couldn't hunt rabbits, we would still have rabbits. Mm-hmm. And we had an empty hutch, so Dad lifted the hutch lid, opened the door to the little trap, and there was a little possum just hissing at us, kind of crammed way up in the back. Kind of scary to see a possum. They're not the most beautiful thing in the world.
That's right.
So anyway, he dumped it out, and possum skittered out into the rabbit hutch. And we closed up the rabbit hutch, and we put some food out there for it. I don't remember what it was. But Daddy got home around 5 o'clock. And that night, I just happened to have a school singing program with my classmates. So we all had to go to this competition to sing at school. And we did. But the whole time I was thinking, I want to get back to that possum. I wanted a raccoon, but I'll settle for a possum. And so we ended up winning the singing contest, and we all got a Three Musketeers bar, and that was fun. But anyway, as soon as I got home, first thing I did was go check that rabbit hutch, and the little possum was gone. And I don't see how it could have gotten out unless it was let loose. I don't think he could have popped the top of that hutch open. So I wondered if my mom might have done it before we went to the singing contest, because she would not have wanted me raising a possum. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would she have put up with raising the raccoon, or really put up with raising anything?
She would have, yeah.
But not a possum.
She was very animal-oriented herself. And no, I don't think the possum was her thing.
That's great. Well, and it just kind of takes you back to the mind of a little kid who, his dad's taking him hunting and fishing. Mm-hmm. He's in the outdoors. Yeah, a fascination with wildlife,
catching tadpoles, picking blackberries, all that stuff.
And you just want to get your hands on it. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that's kind of what it goes back to?
Very much so. And I talk to people that I work with, whether it's the museum and when I work at the Department of Wildlife, it's always the same. Little kids like that outdoor experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I've thought about this as you've kind of told me the story of your career and life and inspiration, but the purpose. I thought about that word purpose. When you look at all of it, putting your work on paper and on canvas, and then seeing it in the magazine and seeing it published or seeing it in a display. But that career in doing that in the outdoors in Mississippi, what would you say is the grand purpose that you have found in all of that?
The grand purpose for me, it's a multi-answered thing here. First of all, I get some kind of personal reward. You might even call it spiritual. I don't know. Because I'm in creation. It's a job well done if I do it correctly. And I get to share it with other people, which means a lot to me because other people get to see things that they probably do not get to see, particularly in these sketches I've been doing for Mississippi Outdoors. I mean, a lot of that stuff I've never seen. Some of it's endangered species or a plant that is maybe not rare, but has different stages that I've not been that I don't necessarily know about. So it's also a learning experience for me. And I have to learn about these plants and these frogs and mammals and birds and reptiles. Yeah.
Yeah. Really cool.
It is.
If you had a young person listening, let's say that maybe there's a dad driving down the road in his truck, to a fishing trip, and he's got his little boy or little girl, and they're listening to this. And the little youngin' thinks, you know what? I want to be an artist. You have any advice?
First, I'd say don't do it. No.
Make it a hobby?
No, well, look, it turned out to be a wonderful thing for me. It's not something you'll get rich in, but I was so fortunate to have two parents that encouraged me to do what I love to do. And I love to do music. I play bluegrass music. I play with some guys at the office at the museum. My dad played music. My dad encouraged me to draw. My mother, being an artist, encouraged me to draw. So, I mean, they wanted me to find a way to make a living. So that's why I got into commercial art, because once I realized I wasn't going to become a biologist, I had to find some practical way to do it. And that's graphic arts would have done that. It was called commercial art back then. But the good thing is I was able to keep this alive and find a way to make it work and find a market for it, find my little niche. And I believe that if you stick with something long enough, practice enough, make a lot of mistakes, get a lot of stuff behind you, you can do just about anything. And I do think there people that do go into art can find it to be very rewarding.
What's the best part of being a combination of an artist and an outdoorsman in Mississippi, specifically Mississippi? What's the best thing about that?
Well, first of all, in a way, I'm glad of this. Mississippi is a little bit underrated. We're kind of under the radar on a lot of things. Mississippi is one of the states that still has a pretty good bit of wilderness compared to a lot of states. We're not as urban as a lot of states. In fact, we still have an undammed river, the Pascagoula, that's one of the few still left in the country. So there are some unique qualities about Mississippi. Now, it's hot as all get out and humid as all get out, but we have a lot of life. And our swamps are just full. Our trees are full. Our pastures and prairies. We've got a lot of variety here, and there's just a lot to inspire, specifically in Mississippi.
This may even be an unfair question to end with, but do you have a one single favorite piece of art or work of art that you've done over the years?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and somebody bought it, and it was two dogs. It was a red bone hound and a blue tick, and they were splashing around in the water trying to get the scent of a raccoon or something. That painting turned out really good, and I like the reflections in it. But I ended up selling it to somebody. I think it was some lawyer maybe here in Jackson. But every now and then I think about that painting, and that was kind of a jumping off point. Sometimes you do a painting and you realize it just took you to another level. And you say, all right, I'm here now. So I'm going to go up some more. Well, a lot of times you come back down a little bit before you make that big jump. So it's a lot of back and forth on your way up. But that was one of those that I'll remember as a highlight. Yeah, and there have been others since then, but I don't know if I could recall them off the top of my head.
Yeah. You mentioned retirement.
Mm-hmm.
That's the plan, and it's in the works.
Yeah, that's coming up. June 28th would be my last day. It's just a couple of months away. But I don't want to leave completely. I want to be with my grandchildren more and paint more. But after my 3 months that I have to take off, I'm hoping that I can go back to the museum and work 10 or 20 hours, and maybe even here too. We'll just see if that's in the cards or not, but I would love for that to happen. And even if it doesn't, I still want to do volunteer work.
I sure have enjoyed getting a chance to meet you and talk to you, Sam. Appreciate you coming here and being on the show.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's been my pleasure.
And it's been everybody's pleasure to see your work over the years, and wish you well when retirement does come along right around the corner. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure we'll see some more of your work on down the road. Just
because I'm retired doesn't mean I won't stop doing it.
Right. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening to the show, Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.